Absolute backbone, courage, calling out woke nonsense, representing the forgotten majority. The Nick Fuentes view, let's just have a frank conversation, is such a fringe view. Well, I think we just firstly have to have a politics that represents the forgotten majority. Taxpayer-funded state authorities prioritising the interests of Islamists over the interests of the British people. The Americans who are watching this have just had a big debate about Somalis in America. Stats about Somalis in Britain. 72% of Somalis in Britain are living in taxpayer-funded social housing.
Hello and welcome to Harry Cole Saves the West, the show where American grit meets British backbone. We are still in Britain this week and with another Brit with some backbone, I might say myself. Matt Goodwin, author, it says here, of one of the largest Substack newsletters in Europe. What's your secret sauce, Matt? What are people drawn to?
Absolute backbone, courage, calling out woke nonsense, representing the forgotten majority on issues like migration and crime.
The question everyone wants to know. We've just interviewed Laila Cunningham. She's going to be Reform's candidate for Mayor of London. Will we be seeing Matt Goodwin, MP, in 2028, 2029, whenever Keir Starmer deigns to allow Britain to have another election? He cancelled lots and lots of elections. Will we be seeing Matt Goodwin, the man in the arena?
Yeah. The first thing to say, by the way, is I think Laila Cunningham is a really good appointment for Reform.
Yes.
I think she can actually take the fight to Sadiq Khan. She's an incredible communicator. I think also, she's on top of her brief. She's already chased down Sadiq Khan in the street about key issues. She's a local councillor. She knows her stuff. So I think it's a really shrewd appointment by Reform. In terms of me, look, at this point, I'm all in. As you know, Harry, I was in the universities for 20 years.
You were so drummed out.
I had
of woke institutions for saying it like it is, right?
Well, I left voluntarily. I wasn't chased out. I left voluntarily because I looked at the state of our country and I said, I can't keep writing about this. I actually want to do something about it.
Get on the pitch.
We started the newsletter, which was basically representing the forgotten majority. I've been campaigning for Reform for a couple of years now. Nigel Farage and the team know, I'm all in if they need it. If they think it's valuable, I'm there to support the party.
Well, that's a politician's answer, isn't it?
Is it? Well, that's true. I'm there to represent the people because I think everyone can sense we're gonna lose this country if we don't start turning things around urgently.
I want to talk about that very point in a moment. Let's just talk while we're talking about Laila Cunningham. There's been a bit of a weird backlash to the fact that she's a Muslim. There's this idea that Reform, Zia Youssef, the Reform, I'm not sure what the exact title is these days. He was chairman, and then he was head of Doge, and then he's head of implementation, or what exactly. But, a prominent Muslim in Reform gets a lot of sort of bile online from the far right for, being a Muslim, but also being involved in Reform. Farage gets a lot of stick for, has got a lot of stick from quite prominent figures on the far right. Lawrence Fox, for example, Dan Wootton today. For appointing Muslims. I mean, it feels like a slightly toxic argument to be having, isn't it?
I find it quite odd. It's unusual for me in that I know these people themselves. I know Zia, I know Laila, I know Zia better than Laila, but what I've talked about with Laila is, she's gone harder than the vast majority of people in frontline British politics when it comes to the grooming gangs. Zia's been consistent in his positioning. I think he's one of the most competent operators in British politics today. And fundamentally, Harry, in this, I actually trust Nigel Farage's judgment. I really do think he's got his instincts in the right place. And this kind of narrative that we're in a sort of, end game where nobody from a minority background can play a role in saving Britain is, what would you say, for example, to the 1 in 3 black and minority ethnic Brits who voted for Brexit? Yeah. Right? Or what do you say to the Hispanic and Latino voters who are fervently backing Trump? There's a lot of minorities who actually want to save Western nations too.
It's this idea that, just because your heritage, your birth, your religion, you're somehow automatically rejected from the mainstream, and it doesn't really add up. It sort of feels like a slightly imported row that's happening in America is now happening here.
I think this, let's say the Nick Fuentes view, let's just have a frank conversation. I think this kind of, sort of white supremacist, openly anti-black,
sort of post-racist days,
anti-Semitic, that sort of view is such a fringe view, and it's a sort of purity spiral among people on the right of politics, that they've gone into this strange place that might appeal to about 1-2% of the population.
Because of X,
and also, can I just say something else?
Can
I just say something else about this in Britain, because I think this is important. That view, I personally take as an insult to my grandparents' generation, right? My grandfather fought in the Second World War, fought against Hitler, fought against Nazism, fought against anti-Semitism. I actually take that view as a personal insult to the legacy of our country. And if you're a Gen Z praising people like Nick Fuentes and you're sitting in Britain...
And saying Hitler's a cool dude.
Hitler's a cool dude or whatever. You are
as
as anti-British as the people you complain are trying to take over the country.
Obviously, it's massively amplified in the age of TikTok, social media, Rumble, X, you name it, it's there, you can find it. Do you think that sort of amplification of the wackos is making it harder for people who have genuine concerns about the state of the country to sort of voice them without being tarred with that same brush? And how do you... I suppose the question I'm looking for is how do you put enough clear water on the right between these idiots and people who are, like yourself, who say Britain stands at a historic crossroads?
Well, I think we just firstly have to have a politics that represents the forgotten majority who are basically saying we don't want mass uncontrolled immigration, we don't want broken borders, we don't want two-tier policing, we don't want a broken model of multiculturalism. But by the way, we're not out and out racists. We actually have legitimate concerns. Those are the people that I think, Reform and others should be leaning into and representing, not those on the fringes. Now, the reality is over the last 30 years under Labour and the Tories, and I would argue parts of the media, we have not been able to have a conversation with those voters about what's happened with the state of the country. Right?
I think Brexit was the first sort of howl at rage of the fact that for 20 years, if you mentioned immigration under the New Labour, you were called a racist. Right?
Yeah, well, absolutely, and that's partly why Reform's #1 in the polls, 31%, as you and I are talking, right? And I actually think Reform's going to go higher. I think Reform's going to start inching towards the mid-30s.
Your former career as a psephologist.
As a psephologist, but there is an important point here. There are millions of hard-working, tax-paying, law-abiding Brits, patriotic Brits who are saying, actually, I want this Westminster regime removed. I want people like me to be put into the driving seat. That means voting Reform. And I think those are the people that we have to ensure whatever comes next remains fully anchored in.
Do you think the fringe, I think what the latest ones, Advance, they're called. I think there's a couple of other sort of right-wing, far-right spin-offs of Reform. For every sort of wacko that Farage and Reform lose to the far right, do you think they're making enough ground with what would be considered once moderate middle-of-the-road voters, former Tories, former Labour voters, coming over?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. I think there are a few things Reform need to do. The first thing I would say to people like those who are supporting Advance, or
the Ben Habib and who were at the forefront of Reform.
Well, the people on the right of Reform, if you like, right? If anybody out there cares about the state of Britain, like I do, and they're going into the next general election not voting for Reform, they have to really look themselves in the mirror, because as Nigel has said, this is the last chance for this country. The next election is the last chance for this country. So if you are concerned about issues like migration and borders, and you're not voting Reform, you are basically helping to stop, the saving of this country. What Reform need to do, I think, is reach into people who don't traditionally vote, because those are the people who came out to vote for Brexit, pushed it over the line.
Donald Trump.
Working class Labour voters, there's still a lot more of those voters that I think Reform can win over.
No, I totally agree.
And about that 15% to 20% that's remaining in that Tory coalition, I think a lot of that can still actually be squeezed by Reform. Because what essentially Reform will say at the next election is, if you vote Tory, you get all these mad lefties over here. Yeah. So I think Reform will rightly focus on squeezing that vote, but also going for those working class.
But also, if you add up the Tory vote right now and you add up the Reform vote, it's 54%. And it's clearly, the ascendancy is on the right.
But the other thing about this, right, is the next election is going to be a realignment election, but not like 2019. If you remember what Boris did, right, what Boris and Cummings did, which was really clever, is they said, we're going to go all in on Brexit. We're going to go into the casino of British politics. We're going to say, let's get this thing over the line. Yeah. And because of the way in which Leavers dominate the map of politics, right? They won that enormous majority and the left basically was divided and the left couldn't win. Here's what Nigel Farage, I think, will end up doing at the next election is saying, well, we're not going to do that with Brexit. We're going to do it with immigration. Immigration is going to be the next big realigning issue in this country. And you can see it because Leave voters care just as much about immigration as they do Brexit. Now, if Farage does that, if Reform do that, people like Laila and others, Zia and everybody, if we all do that, the left will be divided in the cities and the college towns and in the, the urban areas, and it will allow Reform to basically outflank the establishment.
Do you think the predictions are plenty now and actually forecasts that show actually the reforms that have been done to legal migration already, plus the whacking great number of Brits who are leaving this country, means that actually come 27, 28, 29, you could be looking at a situation where net migration's in the tens of thousands. And, not as many people are coming, but lots of people are leaving, and I suppose that will be where the argument had. Do you think immigration will be the salient dividing line it is today? Sorry, then, as it is today?
I think it's going to remain the biggest issue in this country for the next 10, 20 years because people out there are not just concerned, Harry, about the static net migration figure. Everyone out there is talking about what kind of country are we becoming. Take Fraser Nelson's argument, right? We're going to end up with net zero migration and therefore Keir Starmer, the Labour Prime Minister, will be in a good position because he'll be able to say we brought immigration down. But actually, all they're doing is they're losing the high-skill entrepreneur or the doctor, the British doctor, the British nurse to Australia.
And the banker and the...
And they're replacing them with a low-skill, low-wage worker from Pakistan or Bangladesh. Now, everybody can see this change is happening in our country. Everybody can see this is about demography. This is about what kind of country are we becoming? Are we becoming a place that we recognise, that we love, a place that we want to live in? Or are we becoming something else entirely?
A country that, what it looks like, what that really means is, a country that people don't recognise from 10, 15, 20, 50 years ago. The rise of Islam in this country is a subject that people have been too afraid to talk about for too long, in my view. If the next election is, as you say, fought on immigration, we are going to see that question brought to the forefront finally of British politics.
Absolutely, absolutely. Reform have already said they're going to be the first political party in this country to ban the Muslim Brotherhood, like many other countries around the world have done.
Yeah, and the Americans are pretty keen on us to do it as well.
Absolutely. I would also like to see Reform come forward with a detailed policy around how we're going to tackle the Islamization of British society, which
what
as
do you
we've
mean?
seen...
What exactly do you mean by that?
What I mean is what we've seen in Birmingham and the West Midlands, which is taxpayer-funded state authorities prioritising the interests of Islamists over the interests of the British people. We're in a dangerous place, actually, Harry, where sectarianism, a religious-based sectarianism, which is visible in the House of Commons, we have independent Muslim MPs making the case for blasphemy laws, cousin marriage. We have local Muslim councillors wanting to separate men and women, to have, separate spaces, as it were. I'm sorry, these things are not British. So we have to have this conversation about how we're going to take on the Islamification of areas of our country.
Were you surprised to see what's played out since October in the West Midlands over the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans being banned? We were told that originally this was because these fans were thugs and a threat of violence. Then we were told, well, the community want it banned. Quote to the community. We all know who that is. And now it transpires that actually the community were the ones making threats of violence, and then the Israeli fans were banned. I mean, most people, I think, will find that quite shocking. You seem to be nodding along as if, you sort of expect this sort of thing.
I wasn't surprised at all. This is the same part of the country, don't forget, the same police authority that suppressed information about the grooming gang scandal in the West Midlands. We have known for some time that local politicians, Muslim politicians, have been lobbying state authorities. Don't forget, we still got a school teacher in this country from Batley in hiding. We were
discussing this exactly last night.
Because that school teacher happened to teach children what's in the national curriculum. Happened to teach kids about free speech. And then I hear people in London saying, we don't have a problem with multiculturalism. I'm afraid we do. What we're seeing is the rise of Islamic sectarianism, which there's an interesting report in France briefly, it's important. Last year a report came out. Nobody in the UK really picked it up. And it said, the threat from Islamism won't come top down through violence. It will come bottom up through the infiltration of state institutions. That is what we see in the West Midlands. What we saw with the police saying, actually, sorry, we've got to mention this, guys. Our decision to ban Israeli football fans wasn't so much to do with the Israeli football fans, but as Nick Timothy has shown, and hats off to him, we're in different parties, but I fully respect the work he's done. They said, oh, actually, we were also worried about Islamist thugs kicking off because Jews happen to be coming into
a select committee without.
And this is a police force. And then we're told by Keir Starmer and his allies that if you think there's two-tier justice in this society, then you're misinformed. It's absolutely ridiculous. We clearly have a two-tier society. It should be the rule of law being applied evenly and equally, irrespective of religion and race. That has not happened in the West Midlands.
Do you think that is the election sort of battle and debate to be had to, win over sort of working Brits who care more about the economy, care more about the NHS, and you can call me sort of uni party, whatever you want, sort of mainstream media, but is this really the issue to get people down to the polling booths?
The first thing to say is it's not the cost of living crisis or immigration. If you're wasting £10 billion a year on welfare benefits for foreign nationals, immigration is also about the economy, so we need to actually talk about them honestly. I'll give you one example. Why is it the fact, the Americans who are watching this have just had a big debate about Somalis in America. Here are two stats about Somalis in Britain. 72% of Somalis in Britain are living in taxpayer-funded social housing. Nearly half of Somalis in Britain are what we call economically inactive. Much higher levels than what we've got among hard-working British people here on these islands. And we need to have a conversation about this. The conversation is who is contributing to our country and our economy and who is not. That is the conversation we have to have. Or in other words, whose side is Westminster on? Because I think we're building a social contract, Harry, where Westminster is on the side of people who live on welfare, people who break our laws by entering our country illegally, and people who are not from our country.
Astonishing stat out the other week that a couple who have now, with the benefit cap being lifted, three children on benefits, on universal credit, plus housing benefit, take home the same amount of money, around £86,000, as someone earning £140,000.
Yeah, it's insane.
But there are a lot more voters there are a lot fewer voters earning £140,000 than are living on benefits.
And it's not even about the money. We're also importing radically different cultures while subsidising people who are holding those cultures.
The debate in the USA has moved not really on beyond border control to mass deportations. Do you think Britain will be having that similar debate by 2028?
I think we're already having that debate.
No, on a mainstream scale, though.
Well, this ultimately is coming down to a word that President Trump has used even in his Instagram, which is remigration. And the answer, or the question, that I ask about remigration is, how do you define it? Because if you look at, say, what has been promised in the UK, we have parties that have said, we'll immediately detain and deport anybody who enters illegally. We'll deport foreign criminals. We will remove you if you don't learn the language, if you don't contribute, if your visa expires. Does that count as remigration? That seems to certainly be in the ballpark of removals. Yeah. And it's a bit like the answer that J.D. Vance once gave, where he said, look, before I even answer the question about remigration, first, I want all of the illegal migrants out of my country. Then I want all of the foreign criminals out of my country. Then I want people who don't contribute and just rely on the state out of our country. Then come back to me about the other question.
And you think Britain is on that path as well?
I think all Western nations are asking themselves the same question today, which is who are we and how do we remain something that we recognise and we love, that we want to live with, that we want to actually remain a part of?
Laila Cunningham talked about hope and not talking down things too much, and actually, it can be relentlessly negative. Has the country woken up in time?
I think Laila Cunningham is right to say that. The three words that I would use, change is coming. I think that's what people want to hear, which
we're
is
not allowed. Keir Starmer says we're not allowed three-letter slogans anymore.
Yes, well, smash the gangs. Smash the gangs. What happened to smash the gangs? Keir Starmer, the most unpopular leader in polling history.
Since polling was invented.
As you and I are talking, the Labour government's at a record low, 11% of Brits approve of this Labour government,
Which gets
low.
into a real question about legitimacy and whether this government actually has the ability to govern.
These are unprecedented times. You look at France, Jordan Bardella is probably going to become next president of France. You look at Austria, you look at Sweden, you look at Italy. The whole traditional map is being rewritten.
Yeah.
Why not here? Why not Labour and the Tories actually getting smashed at the next election, Reform winning an enormous majority, and saying to people, actually, not in a vacuous way, vote for change, but actually qualitatively, based on policies, based on manifestos. This is fundamentally different from anything you've been offered in the last 30 years.
You say change is coming. When do you think this government gets through to 29?
I think Nigel Farage actually is right in saying that a financial crisis of some form may end up bringing down this government before we get to the next election. Look, if the gilt yields start spiking and the markets start calling time on this government...
Well, people are, gold is surging because people aren't buying the dollar anymore.
Potentially, that's actually how we get there. And, I don't want to hope for a financial crisis, but I am also genuinely concerned about the ability of this country to endure another 3 or 4 years. Just one stat briefly, Harry. If I'm wrong and the Labour government stays in place until 28, 29, you're talking about 500,000 people on current trends entering illegally on the small boats. 500,000. That's enormous. These numbers are enormous. Before you get to the collapse of growth and declining living standards...
Or indeed legal migration.
Nothing even working in this country... these numbers are completely bonkers, not like anything we've seen before. And that's why so many people... I go around the country every week giving talks, right? They always say to me...
Because you're standing to be an MP.
What they always say to me is, it's becoming civilizational. It's a sense that we are losing our country. That is the feeling out there.
One more go. Where you say you're touring the country, looking around, giving talks, anywhere take your fancy as a place to represent?
Couldn't possibly comment.
He's already a politician. Look at that. I remember when he was a mere academic, and look at him now, all smartened up. Matthew Goodwin, author of one of the largest Substacks.
Not the, but
one of the largest newsletters in all of Europe. Thank you for coming on, as ever. Come and see us again soon.
Thank you.
And keep us posted. Matthew Goodwin.
Buddy.